Delighted to speak with everybody attending our webinar series. As Mitch said, this is a session focused on strategic innovation areas within the context of enterprise innovation programs. And it's part of the governance series of webinars that we're doing, really trying to help organizations think about how to get better alignment between the needs of the organizations within which we work and the innovation activities that we carry out on the ground. And within our software, we obviously have some capabilities to help us with that, but this presentation isn't going to be about the application as such. It's going to be much more about the things that we need to do, the conversations we need to have around the world of innovation, enterprise innovation specifically, that are helpful in fostering that alignment and better linkage between the strategic parts of our business and us as innovation professionals. So I introduce myself first, and then I'll just run through a very few quick slides about HYPE for those of you who are not familiar with the organization. My background is in knowledge management and new product development. I run a small innovation consulting team within HYPE that stretches across from California to the Middle East. And we as a team try to speak as many conferences as we can. We write a fair few articles as well. So feel free to try and catch us, either myself or another member of the team at the various events that Mitch mentioned a moment ago, or take a look at the articles that we write on either innovationmanagement.se or innovationexcellence.com. Quick way to find us is to search for HYPE, or you can search for one or other of our most prolific bloggers. That's myself or Hutch Carpenter. And what we do as a team is typically client advisory work, training, coaching, mentoring of innovation management professionals around their innovation management strategies and tactics to engage typically large or complex organizations in the work of innovation. And that includes monitoring the health of those programs and ensuring they're as sustainable as possible. So before I talk too much about the strategic innovation area topic, I want to talk a little bit about HYPE, and just to put this into context for those of you who are not existing customers or don't know us. We've been 13 years in business now, around 80 or so employees, and all we do is innovation management, the software and services associated with that. Headquartered in Germany and in Bonn, and our US headquarters is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the US. We also have presence in the UK, elsewhere in Germany, Austria, and elsewhere in the US in Denver. We have our application installed in over 180 different organizations worldwide. I'll show you a few of those in a second. And it's an off-the-shelf product with lots of good best practices built in that's been shaped through our experiences of working with organizations over the years. It's very, very configurable, so it can be adapted to the things that make you and your organization and your objectives unique. And of course, part of that is getting the process right as well, and that's my part of the business, to help organizations get the things that sit outside of a software implementation in an enterprise innovation world to work effectively. So on the right-hand side, you've got professional services. On the left-hand side of what we do, process. We sit between those two groups of the process and professional services, making sure that the programs that our clients establish are as effective and sustainable as possible. Okay, so we're also well recognized in the market. The analysts like us, and if you're interested in any of these particular areas, there's more about, for example, the Forrester Wave on our website, or if you'd like to hear specifically about what one of these organizations thinks of us, just get in contact and we can provide you with more details. So I want to always put a slide up about the types of companies that we work with, just to illustrate the diversity of different projects that we're engaged with. Some of these programs are enterprise-wide, and some of them are departmental. Some run at very, very large scale. So, for example, DHL runs across around 250,000 people in about 20 or so different languages. Some are focused on efficiency, and some are focused on growth. Some are focused on both of those things. Some projects are focused on idea generation and crowdsourcing. Some are based on execution and implementation. And again, others are based on the whole portfolio. So with that in mind, this is where I live, sustainable enterprise innovation programs. This is my world. Well, why sustainable? Well, we know, I think, as innovators that one-off innovations aren't enough. Enterprise, well, I think most of you Wiki attendees here would recognize that everyone can help us innovate, not just the traditional groups from R&D or product development. Our customers, our partners, the people on the fringes of our organization who also can help us. So inter-enterprise innovation, of course, is growing substantially. Because we're looking to extend the scale of innovation, that's why software becomes important to involve many more people in the process. But as soon as we put software in place, we need to think about how do we get people to use this program sustainably. A tool is a tool, and yes, the Hype tool is very good and is very helpful, but the reality is we need to think about the individuals that we have in our organizations outside to ensure that we can put a program in place that encourages them to get engaged time after time. And that's my world, helping guide clients and the innovation practitioners on how to get people involved. So just some fundamental assumptions that I think puts everything we're about to say into context. The first one is we're looking as innovation professionals to get more people involved. And that means at a tactical innovation level and a more strategic innovation level, and we'll dig into that more as we progress through today's session. We accept, of course, that collective expertise is powerful, that innovations from individuals often will require refinement, development, challenge, and bringing together diverse opinions together will typically lead to better developed concepts and a better qualified innovation funnel. We want to, of course, make better use of our people and knowledge, the resources that we have available, and we want to use that resource to develop greater levels of innovation. So if that's the needs on the left-hand side that I think most of us would sign up to quite freely, this is the solutions that we try to provide on the right-hand side. So we want to give people the ability to share their ideas and their insights. We want to encourage extensive collaboration, not just getting people to share in a Dropbox way. We want people to share, collaborate, build, improve upon the ideas, submissions, concepts of others. We want to tap into the hidden knowledge pools, those people that wouldn't normally be part of enterprise innovation programs. And we want to retain everything that we generate for the future. So as circumstances change, we have a portfolio, a repository of new innovations that we can call upon time after time. So that's the kind of, I guess, the fundamental assumptions that we all need to bear in mind. Let's move on to the topics we're going to talk about today. So focus first on what a strategic innovation area is. Apologies, my screen's just gone off presentation mode, so let me bring that back. Here we go. I'm going to talk about what a strategic innovation area is, and I'm going to put that into the context of practically how Hype clients are using strategic innovation areas. We're going to look at the challenges faced by innovators, particularly in regard to strategic alignment. Then we'll think about some activities to help us become better aligned and much better linked to the C-suite and their needs and their objectives. And finally look at some pitfalls or an avoidance tactics for those pitfalls, the sort of common issues that some organizations will face when they think about becoming better aligned and more strategically aligned with their innovation program. This isn't an entirely straightforward activity, and there are some things that we need to take into account. So first and foremost, what is a strategic innovation area? Now, within the Hype world, it has a specific meaning, but essentially it's a macro-level grouping of innovation topics. So what we do is we tend to group all of the different innovation work activities that we're involved with into buckets or repositories and align those buckets or repositories to something that has meaning at the top levels of our organizations. Of course, what that means is it becomes a filter or a search point across the innovation portfolio, so we can have a look at one element of the portfolio, all of the innovation work that's happening within that portfolio, report on it, filter on it, track and monitor it over time. Of course, then we can move on to presenting background information on that macro need to the company. So if we have these subsets of our portfolio, we can actually present associated information to the organization or to those outside of our organization that will help them understand, have a better feeling about what we're trying to do, where we're trying to innovate, what's important, and what we're focusing on. So essentially, it's this group, very simple group of buckets of innovation work or activities that are aligned to a relatively senior agenda in the organization. Now, you may have seen this before, you've been on our webinar series or on our website, but this is the Hype full lifecycle innovation process. And you can see the very first step is what we call strategic innovation areas. And these are these buckets, these subsets of the portfolio. And everything to the right of that light blue area of strategic innovation areas is a subset of the strategic innovation area. So a campaign will be part of one or a number of those buckets. All ideas will be assigned to one or a number of those buckets as well. And that lineage exists right through that end-to-end workflow. So that by the time you're building ideas into concepts or developing innovation projects, you can still look, filter, and report on everything that is assigned to a particular strategic innovation group. And this is very helpful because it provides us with an end-to-end governance per category, per strategic innovation area across all of our innovation work. Now, whether you use the hype workflow or not, it doesn't really matter for today, but I just want to put it into the context of how our clients are essentially using these strategic innovation areas. So let's look at what I mean, what could be, what could this mean in practice? Well, different organizations use them in different ways, but just as an example, you could look at things that are relevant to the C-suite agenda. For example, growth, efficiency, quality, customer satisfaction. Underneath that, you would have a set of activities or projects or roles that essentially jobs for the innovation group. So under the growth area, we might be looking at a particular product line or a particular market. On the quality, we might again be looking at a particular product or a process, and so on and so forth. A strategic innovation area may have a multitude of different activities underneath it, or it may just have one. But there does need to be some linkage really with those at the top levels of our organization and those with budget. Now, some organizations will look at this a different way, and they'll focus just on product groups or on regions or market segments, and it'll be that kind of level that they put their time in. It doesn't really matter. The point is there should be a clear linkage between what those at the top of our organizations care about and the work that we need to do as innovators. So what's the purpose of a strategic innovation area? Why would we even care about this? Why are we running a webinar on this topic at all? Well, strategic innovation areas at Hype are actually relatively new, not perhaps within our clients, but having it codified within our software is a relatively recent thing. We've only been doing it for the last couple of years. The reason that we decided to add this capability and talk more about it, what we found is that innovation professionals would typically, or in some cases, were disconnected to what the top levels of an organization really wanted. And what we found is if we could create a better linkage between the needs of the C-level, the needs of the organization, and the innovators, we typically got greater levels of success. So the main point, of course, is to align all our innovation efforts to key business needs and objectives, irrespective of what they may well be. That could, of course, be growth, it could be efficiency, it could be penetrating a new market, but some form of key business need would be, macro need would be underpinned by a number of different elements of innovation work. Connecting the C-level agenda to the practical campaigns that we see every day. So you may well invite people to idea campaigns for them to share and collaborate on a particular topic. What is the connection between that activity and what those at the very top of our organization really care about? Well, if we have a better connection, we have a clear connection between those two, it's more likely that people will participate and join in because they have greater levels of belief that something will happen once they participate and share their content. So that will give them greater confidence, greater belief in the process, that there's real budget, real enthusiasm, real energy around this piece of innovation work. Now, one of the parts and challenges, of course, of enterprise innovation programs is we're typically inviting a greater range of people to participate in the innovation job. So those people that have never innovated before, never shared ideas before, so they're a long way away from our product or service development groups, now have an opportunity, of course, to contribute in reaction to perhaps campaigns or other innovation activities like ideation sessions. Well, the question is, do they know enough to help us? Do they have enough background information, enough context to be able to share what we're looking for and what's really important? Again, grouping these innovation activities and then thinking about what kinds of information does this particular group need in order to support us is a very helpful process. Just to build upon what I said before, actually then making that linkage clear between those at the top level and the innovation work that people see day to day helps build that credibility and belief in the process and the sponsors and the campaigns and the other innovation work that we'll do. And fifth point on here is on the governance. So we want to be able to search, we want to be able to look back, we want to see what we were looking at before, we want to be able to filter on that. We never know when things might change, when we need to look again at what we've done in the past and make the most out of the portfolio of IP and knowledge and insights that we have grouping them is much massively constructive in that process. So the other thing to bear in mind is everybody in an organization, whether you're structured like this or in an alternative structure, should be able to get behind the strategic innovation area. It should have a common and clear, irrefutable meaning for everybody in the organization that, okay, this is the macro need of the company. If it's a growth need or it's an efficiency need, everybody has a clear feeling about what that really means. So when they see the innovation work that comes in the form of brainstorming sessions or idea campaigns or business cases or new product development activities, they can understand perhaps less about that detailed work, but they can understand where it fits. So if they have complementary knowledge, expertise, information, they can see where it may fit into the overall process. But really, everyone should be able to understand the strategic innovation area, and it should have a clear and irrefutable meaning to everybody. So let's look at some of the challenges that we face as innovators getting our products through. I used to work in new product development for a time in Fujitsu, and you know, I face some of these challenges as well. And I think it's interesting to think about the sort of problems that we see day to day, where this concept of alignment may have some benefit. The first one I want to pick out is lack of execution. So we see good ideas, we see that they reach the top levels of our organization, they're seen by management, but they're simply not implemented. And as an innovators, we kind of wonder why. What was it that stopped the organization moving forward to it? Maybe the management agreed that ideas are good, but there's still no action. And of course, that's incredibly frustrating for us as innovators, as people looking to develop our little projects, and we see that lack of action. That can be you know, really disheartening. You wonder why on earth we're bothering if the things that we're working on simply aren't adopted. But you know, we see it time and time again in our clients still that there's a lack of alignment between what top level care about, or say they care about, what the job as innovation professionals that we do, and then meeting those two in the middle. The second challenge, of course, is lack of budget. So everybody sees that there's a new option on the table, a new business concept we could invest in. We'd like to do it. We like the opportunity. We see the potential, but for some reason, management simply won't release funding from other activities to take a risk on something new. It feels safer to carry on doing what we've always done than to perhaps stop doing something, release some budget, release some resources, and then invest in something new. And I think this is a fairly regular complaint that a lot of innovation professionals that I speak to have, and I have some thoughts on this, the solution to this a little bit later on. The next point is the time pressure, and I think certainly through the credit crisis, a lot of companies found this was a key issue. So the companies under some financial pressures to generate perhaps new revenues, perhaps now, or to cut costs, and there's little patience for innovations that may take 3, 5, 10 years to come to market. And so us as innovation professionals simply get less time at the C-level, less airtime, less breathing space, I suppose you could say, to talk about the sort of things that we're working on that we feel are going to be vital for the company as we move forward. So this issue, and this seems to tend to happen when times are tough, when things change, when the company's under significant commercial pressure, the tactical seems to envelop and take over anything that's more strategic. So let's look at some key activities to try and mitigate some of those issues to become better aligned, be that using an enterprise innovation management tool like HYPE, or just in your innovation programs as you're running right now. So the first one I want to think about is some questions. And these were inspired out of a PwC study that was released, I think, last year on breakthrough innovation and growth. And if you'd like a copy of that study, please just put it into the question grouping, or drop us an email, and we'll make sure we give you a copy of that or a link to where you can download it. Let's think about these questions, though. Let's think about these as starting points for how engaging in a more constructive way with the C-suite about what types of topics we should be focusing on, where we should be innovating. So the first one is, how much innovation do we actually need? How big is our growth gap for which innovation will have to close? I'll talk a little bit more about the growth gap in a minute, but essentially it's the gap between the targets that commercially we have within our enterprise and the amount of revenue we're expecting our existing portfolio to deliver at a particular date and time. Well, think about what types of innovation do we need. What's the mix of incremental, breakthrough, more radical innovations that we need to deliver planned growth? If our growth rate, target rate is maybe only 2% per year, then mainly incremental innovation is going to be fine. But if it's 10%, 15%, or we need to double our revenues in 5-10 years' time, then we're going to have a more radical or a more adventurous portfolio. Exactly as you would with a financial portfolio, what's the level of risk and adventure that we really want to take here? And where do we want to focus? How much business model innovation do we really need, and how much technology and product innovation or service innovation do we really need? So what is it we're going to do to ourselves? What is it we're going to do to our products and services? As I said, these are listed and explained in more detail in that report through Breakthrough Innovation and Growth from PwC. So just let us know if you'd like a copy of that. So let's look now about this innovation growth gap. And those of you who have been in the business a while may recognize this kind of thinking, but we expect over time for our revenues for our existing portfolio to drop. If we keep doing the same things in the same way to the same customers, eventually revenues will drop, the market will become more competitive, costs will go up, and so our profits will go down. We know that we can't keep doing the same things forever and still have a consistent and effective growth rate. So of course our reaction to that, and this is why we're all in business, is to develop new things, new products, new services to help fill that gap and hopefully increase the level of growth of the company as well. But of course if we look at the targets that we have as organizations at a particular point in time, and Hype as an enterprise is no different to any other. We have a particular growth target that we have at a particular date. The difference between our forecast revenue from our existing portfolio plus the new stuff that we're working on, taken away from that number, is our growth gap. But of course, not everything that we do is going to be successful. So not every product we put out there will necessarily work. Maybe we have a 1 in 3 hit rate or a 1 in 7 hit rate if we work in pharmaceuticals. But that hit rate needs to therefore be multiplied by that growth gap. And then that gives us essentially our innovation target. So at a particular point in time, we would expect our new portfolio of stuff we're not currently doing to be able to deliver a certain amount of value to the business. And for those of you attending our Innovation Client Forum, NSN, or think about this in a very, very clear way, and have a very specific measure that they do in order to know how much percentage revenue is being delivered by innovation. They'll be speaking a little bit more about that, I think. So why establish strategic innovation areas? Well, the first one is to gain support. Having that conversation with the C-level to understand what the bigger picture is for our business, what the key trends are to which we need to respond to, and what the needs are from the organization is crucial to make sure that our innovation activities aren't wasted and we focus in the right areas. And it also allows us to be more directed with our innovation. So actually state, we want to go in this direction, we want to be able to help fulfill this particular need, and ask the organization particular questions or problem statements or opportunity questions that will help us fulfill those objectives that we have. And that concept of directed innovation, actually steering the organization towards a particular set of focus points, has a much higher adoption rate than those that simply wait for the different stuff to come in. I think KLM once stated that their adoption rate is something like 10 times better for directed innovation, challenge-based innovation, linked to a sponsor with a need, with a budget, than the more traditional Dropbox, let's just see what we find. So actually having that clear picture at the top level enables us to do much better direct innovation efforts, which clearly will result in a much higher implementation rate. Second point is around diversity of opinion. Alignment to that C-level agenda tends to bring in a broader range of contributors to your enterprise programs, because there's a greater set of belief in the new organization and confidence that something will happen as the next step, as we stated before. But equally, what you may find is that C-level will give you a broader range of innovation topics that perhaps you may currently be thinking about. It may be broader than just product and service. It may also include business model innovation. It may include process innovation. So things where perhaps we may not consider themselves to be part of the traditional innovation world, where if we can help in those areas, they would still be constructive in our profit and our revenue numbers. If we can focus on directed innovation activities, such for example, process innovation or business model innovation, will bring in a different group of people than those that perhaps we would get if we just talked about product or service. So actually having that broader range of strategic targets from the C-level will be able to enable us to pull in a wider group of people into the innovation activity, greater levels of diversity of opinion, which we know as innovators is vital to finding new things. We can use a strategic innovation area to brief those non-experts on the nature of the needs and the opportunities that exist. So it doesn't matter that perhaps they're not rooted in the day job. It doesn't matter so much that they don't know exactly about this product or this service line, but by giving them that background information, this macro objective, they can begin to understand better whether they have something to contribute or not. And those that are new to innovation can search, can discover topics in which they're interested. They can look at the database of ideas, concepts, innovations, look retrospectively at different buckets of innovations or different buckets of activity, and begin to get a sense of what the organization really cares about. This is really helpful if you're a new joiner, if you're joined by acquisition, to be able to look back historically at what have we been working on, what's new, what's different, what can we revisit and potentially re-stimulate. So having that diversity of opinion, building up that portfolio of old stuff is very, very helpful. But having it categorized in line with what the organization cared about at a particular point in time is incredibly helpful when it comes to searching and filtering on old stuff. Of course, the obvious one is it should give us greater access to budget. So if we start innovating in line with where the current budgets are, where the current resources sit, it's going to be much more likely that we get our concepts and our business projects adopted. Because those people with budgets where we're focusing on a top 3 agenda item are much more likely to support the new innovations and concepts we bring to them if it's something that they care about. One of the challenges for organizations is to say, well, we like the idea, but there is no budget. Well, let's innovate where there is budget. If there is no budget in a particular area, why are we wasting our time? Maybe we're looking for an outlier, maybe we're looking for something new, but do we really have the headroom to do that and do it sustainably? A much safer approach, a much more tactical approach, you may say, is to innovate where the budgets and resources do sit. We talked already about how that will help participation in the corporate innovation as well as implementation rates. But the other thing, of course, is if we can get those innovations adopted, we can share success stories that will boost further interest in the program. So those other C-level members that perhaps aren't so aware of innovation become more interested because we've been solving some problems over here, and we can now solve some problems over there. That will typically open up other budgets, other areas of strategic focus, and greater levels of diversity of opinion flowing from different types of topics. The other one, which is more, I guess, parochial, which is to protect ourselves. Protect ourselves as innovators. If we can innovate across a balanced portfolio and show value where we have a clear linkage with what the organization cares about, when times change, when markets are different, when we're under cost pressures, we're much more protected. People can't look at us and say, well, what have you delivered to us lately, and make cuts quite so easily if we're delivering at least an incremental innovation portfolio that has some tangible benefits. If that incremental innovation portfolio is linked to what the C-level care about, we are to a certain extent protected as innovation professionals when the circumstances change. If we only focus on radical innovation that's perhaps going to take us 10 years to realize, and then the circumstances of our business change, so perhaps we look for cuts, we look to make reductions in staff, are we an easy target because we haven't delivered anything of value to the business more recently? Now, certainly in my career over the last 8 years, I've seen this sort of thing happening where people running very effective, very impressive innovation programs have been cut because they weren't focused on some of the incremental things connected to what people at the C-suite cared about, in addition to the more adventurous and radical things that they did. So some useful tips for you. Don't list strategic innovation areas for the sake of it. If you have 10 key focus areas, that's probably quite a lot for an organization to absorb. So focus on the ones that you're working on today. You can always add more later, but they should try to create that linkage between the topics that the C-level cares about, their needs and their goals, and the work of innovation that you're doing. And this may be very subtle, it may be very straightforward for you, but making sure that that linkage is going to be helpful. And if a set of strategic innovation areas aren't immediately obvious, add one at a time. Focus on one and add them as you go. But setting up this principle of innovating where the organization cares is a good principle, and it will help everything that you do. Now, don't be worried about mixing up different corporate topics. So you may have some very, very top-level topics, but you may have some that are slightly aside to that around trends or particular product improvements. As long as there is a clear linkage between those at the top organizations with budget and resources and the strategic innovation area, then that's fine to mix those different types of topics. There's no reason why an organization shouldn't do that. People simply gravitate to the topics and the areas that they're most interested in. If you select a strategic innovation area, let's, for example, for the sake of argument, look at process innovation, make sure there's a clear and appropriate explanation of it before adding it into the process. Make sure you can explain it. What does it mean? Go back to that organizational structure. The explanation that we have, will it mean something to everybody in the organization? If not, do we need to simplify it and provide a bit more context? Different cultures, different communities, different skill sets have different tolerances for information and absorbing and reading information. So some cultures are slightly more lazy. They will typically want a headline, a little bit of information. Others will want much more detail. This is where strategic innovation areas are quite really helpful. So that when someone sees a brainstorming session or a campaign question, they can say, where does this fit? Where does it link? They can look at the strategic innovation area and get that more detail, the more detail that they need in order to put it into context and check its relevance to them. So before you run any campaigns or any other innovation activity, select a strategic innovation area to which it aligns so that we keep that confidence and that belief in our organizations. So some questions you can ask your own companies. This will help trying to develop these strategic innovation areas a little bit better. You know, which ones immediately spring to mind? I mean, sometimes you can get a really clear picture by reading your own annual reports. What is it the organization is talking about? What is it we should be doing? Innovation in itself is not a strategic innovation area. But growth, efficiency, market penetration, opening up Southeast Asia, these sorts of topics should be the sort of topics that we're after. These are the things that we should be thinking about. Think about whether it's owned by an individual at the C-level or a group of people. Would the executive level of the company support this as a target for innovation? Is it likely to change in the future? Is it something that's will become flavor of the month? Or is it something that's key and fundamental to all levels of our business? Clearly, the more stable it is, the longer you've been thinking about it, the more likely it is something that we should be having as a strategic innovation area. So is it as simple as simply getting everyone to agree this is a topic in which we should focus, this is an area that we want to invest our time in, or does it require some more steps to work out whether it's really something that we should care about? If in doubt, leave it out and add it in slowly as long as you're safe and secure. This is a key focus area for us. Then think about prioritizing. What types of topics should we be focusing upon now? Is it a particular product line that has a quality issue? Is it a particular market segment that requires some investment and some time? Which ones do we need right now and which ones can wait? If we add 6 strategic innovation areas to the mix and 4 of them actually are going to be things that we're going to focus on towards the next half of the year, there's really no point explaining them in too much detail now. You may as well wait until we're actually working in those areas so there's actually some work to be done before we start highlighting and advertising them to the company. So let's look at some pitfalls and avoidance tactics. I've made it sound maybe a little simple, and there are some flaws and some challenges that, of course, you may be spotting in this approach. The first one is the outlier. What happens to good ideas if they don't fit today's model? What about the things that do not fit with our existing portfolio of strategic innovation areas? And how do we actually address that? There will be some stuff that just doesn't fit. And perhaps this is the world in which we live right now, where we are potentially finding the outliers, finding the more radical things, and we're struggling to get them adopted. So the question is, well, how do we get a balance between making sure we fit for majority of our activities, but still allowing the space for the more radical options? And the best solutions that we see are the organizations that start off relatively tactically. They build credibility for their innovation efforts. They show the tactical or the more incremental innovation portfolio delivering significant benefits to the company. And they build themselves some headroom and confidence in the business to get more adventurous over time. So they start off more reserved and then grow into the role. This seems to be a much more effective approach because if we go radical first, the organization doesn't necessarily buy into what we're trying to achieve, doesn't necessarily understand the concept of innovation immediately. But if we start more tactically, start more focused on things that will deliver benefits quicker, people get used to the approach, they get used to working with each other, collaborating across the enterprise. And so when they add the more radical things, they're already within their comfort zone. They're already used to using the sort of tools and the techniques that people put in place. So this seems to be the most acceptable and most reasonable approach. Build yourself some headroom, get some quick wins, show the value, and then you'll get time and some budget, more budget to actually experiment and be a little bit more adventurous. Now, one of the big challenges that we spoke about earlier was how do we stop doing things and selectively do things that perhaps are more risky? And if I was to look at where our clients struggle, this is one of the most fundamental areas. How do we accept that there's risk in everything, in all options. Going back to that growth gap, we know we can't keep doing the same stuff and maintain the existing growth curve that we're on. We have to do something new. But to do something new, sometimes that means stopping doing something else and actually looking and saying, of the things that we're doing right now, what should we replace with something that's a little bit more risky? Now, of course, that's a challenge for organizations. It feels like less comfortable for a lot of executives. Why would they want to stop doing something that's delivering revenue? Well, the challenge is there a bigger opportunity by adding something from the innovation portfolio and replacing something that we're doing already, taking resources and reallocating them somewhere else? So the question is, how do we get that to be done? And I think that the best examples that I see out there are to look at quantifying the risk of doing nothing, to look at the risk associated with doing exactly as we are doing right now and what that means. Very few organizations really focus on this. They think about, the existing portfolio will always deliver the growth. It simply won't. There's a risk associated with that. If we can quantify the risk on the existing in-market portfolio, we can then look to balance and look at and compare it more effectively with the possibilities that a new portfolio will bring. But unless we look at the cost of doing nothing, we're not changing our approach. It's not a fair fight. The safe, the more tactical path will always win. And so thinking about this in a slightly different way, quantifying that approach of not changing the approach and continuing to sell the same stuff to the same people will even that fight up and make it much more straightforward to begin to releasing some resources on existing activities and making some better, more strategic decisions. There simply is risk in all options. The question is, how adventurous do we want to be? Now, one of the great things about enterprise innovation is we can build a richer and more diverse portfolio of activities. So we invite more people to innovate, create a greater range of options, more choices. But of course, more choices means better decision making. So instead of actually just presenting your management with one option, here's the latest new thing that we think we should take to market. Present them with a range of options. Quantify the risk and the opportunity with each of those. More people contributing will mean a bigger portfolio, a richer portfolio, and it'll give us an opportunity to present a much broader range of choices to management. And in my experience, executives like that. They like a range of choices as opposed to, do you want to do this or not? But if we have enough budget or resources to do one thing, let's look at a choice of 5 and see which one we want to invest our time in. But of course, alignment is even more important in that world. If we generate more content, we need to get things adopted. Otherwise, the organization will become disengaged in our enterprise programs. They won't feel confident that we'll be able to push things forward. All we'll have is 1,000 more ideas and nothing actually going through. So if we're going to generate 1,000 ideas or 100 concepts, let's make sure they are aligned as far as we can, and certainly initially to make sure that stuff does get adopted. So here's a nice little flowchart that I think it summarizes what we've just been speaking about. First and foremost, have a conversation. Agree the strategic innovation areas that you think are most important. Simply try to align the innovation effort to the needs of management. Look to innovate on the tactical areas of your organization first. Show some quick wins, test the process, make sure that you feel comfortable in getting the organization to engage in enterprise innovation, and build confidence from there. Show some financial benefits as quickly as you can. Track and monitor the benefits that are achieved. This will help broaden the innovation portfolio in line with those strategic innovation areas and get a broader range of people and topics to engage, those different types of people so that we can build a richer, more diverse portfolio in line with those strategic innovation areas. And then share success stories. Shout about the benefits and the good stuff that we're doing, because that will help create space for more radical innovation as more people have greater confidence and belief in us as innovators. And of course, we need to go through that cycle again and to actually not stop any element of that. So let's revisit those strategic innovation areas. Are they still relevant as our organization changes, as our culture changes, as objectives change? Always make sure you have that portfolio of tactical activities happening at some level, because that's going to keep us protected in case the markets change. But over time, building that richer, more broad innovation portfolio aligned to where the organization cares will allow us to build that headroom for more radical things. So just finally, before we start taking some questions, and do feel free to start putting some questions into the question box on the GoToWebinar, and we will deal with them right after this little summary. If your new concepts aren't being implemented, check your alignment. Is there a reason why the top levels of your organizations are not buying into the principles and the new products, the new concepts that you're looking at? just sit down with the C-suite, try to understand what their short, medium, and longer-term priorities are, and then think about your innovation portfolio and your jobs to be done in line with those objectives. Let's see where we can align, let's see where we don't align, and let's make sure we have a balanced portfolio which allows us to deliver some tactical wins for the business, but also some more strategic adventurous things later on. Establish that innovation activity in line with those needs. This will help and boost belief in enterprise innovation across the organization. So you have low engagement or low participation right now, maybe establishing those strategic innovation areas will help increase the confidence and belief that something will happen as the next step. And of course, start tactically, show some quick wins, then increase the adventure of your program over time. That's of course going to help you show the greater potential of the options later on. So that concludes the sort of formal part of the webinar today. We have sort of 10 minutes or so for questions, so I'm just going to check in with our question list and see what we have so far. And as we spoke about, we may not have time to answer every question that is asked, but we'll do what we can. So the first question that I'd like to address. Okay, let me just read this. Give me 1 second. Okay. And okay, great. So let's look. Do you see any conflict in having a two-part strategic alignment approach where we have some C-level topics and some product-related topics? Okay, so this addresses a point that I made a little bit earlier, which is there's no real reason why you shouldn't feel comfortable in having a combination of very, very high-level topics and things that perhaps sit slightly lower in the organization that still the organization cares about. No, I don't think there is a conflict as such, as long as each of those strategic innovation areas are easy to understand for the organizations that we're looking to involve and invite to participate in that process. As long as it's clear, everybody is on the same page, and those that we wish to involve in that particular topic can understand it, then I think we're fine. The challenge becomes when you get too low in describing those strategic innovation areas, they're too detailed, that it's hard for the organization to really understand whether there is a clear linkage between budget and resources and activities and the sort of day job activities of brainstorming and new business development and concept development that we may see on the ground. Okay, let's look at the next question we've got here. Okay, so we've been innovating with little connection to the strategic ambitions of the company. Normally they don't listen to us. Any advice for having a more constructive discussion with the leadership? Yes, I think it goes back to what we said a little earlier about starting off with that growth gap topic, looking at what is it that the organization needs in terms of revenue generation or profitability over a period of time, and then tracing that backwards into the work that needs to be done. If you start from a position of saying, we want as innovation professionals to help meet those financial targets that we have, then it's much easier for the organization to sort of understand, okay, now I understand now you understand our agenda, where can you help? So that's the starting point, and I'm simplifying a little bit, but starting off from a point of view, what's the number that we need to contribute for each of these strategic innovation areas? Is it 100 million? Is it 10 million? How much do we need to provide over what time period in order to help us start to focus our activities? Once we have a clearer picture of that, we can then start segmenting our innovation work and say, okay, what needs to come from radical activities? What needs to come from strategic activities? The only way perhaps we're going to meet this target is to be more radical. Okay, so you're then getting the organization to buy into the fact that the time frames that we're working to will require a more adventurous or different kind of approach, will help increase that level of, increase that dialogue between the C-level and the U as innovators. Okay, let's see another question we have here. Do you see a problem starting with a smaller group division and then a company and then expanding? No, absolutely not. I think that it depends on what's right for you as an organization. Some cultures require a refinement in the approach, not just in the strategic innovation area approach, but the approach to enterprise innovation. So starting relatively modestly and then beginning to add other groups or the divisions or the departments to that picture can be quite helpful and constructive in that process, because we can learn and refine our approach as we go. So you can start a relatively safe area of the business, those that are relatively on board, refine your approach, make sure you're happy with it, test it out, and certainly if you're doing sort of online enterprise innovation activities, it's very helpful to give yourself a bit of time to practice, to experiment a little bit, to try different things, and then expanding it to the wider organization when you're happier with the approach that you have at hand. It's a slightly safer approach. There is a disconnect between that, though, and the diversity of opinion point that we made earlier on. One of the big reasons for getting enterprises involved in innovation, of course, is that we want to get a greater set of diverse opinions. Well, if we are restricting the scale of the program, then that will typically limit the amount of diverse opinions we get. So it may well stifle some of the levels of innovation. So it's a balancing act, to be honest. But certainly a lot of organizations are starting off a relatively modest scale and then expanding it. But what they typically do to mitigate that diversity of opinion issue is to focus on a relatively tactical need. So it might be a cost saving or making the process a little faster. That's not traditionally considered to be innovation, but they use innovation tools and techniques to solve those problems, get some quick wins, get some successes, advertise those, and then begin to expand on the back of success. Okay, another question here. Should a strategic innovation area align to breakthrough and incremental innovation, or should firms have two different sets of innovations, radical and incremental? Well, different companies do it different ways, and I'm not sure I'm necessarily the right person to answer without the context of the organization that you're thinking of. The most successful organizations that I see, though, have a portfolio of radical, strategic, and more incremental activities. And of course, organizations define those differently. Some organizations will set a benchmark for radical activity. So anything that sits into this portfolio or this level of revenue or this amount of time is considered more radical or more disruptive, and they'll segment it off and have a separate process for dealing with those things. The strategic innovation space is typically the things that the organization cares about today. So these are things that the C-suite, the executive level, the vice presidents of the organization will consider themselves to be investing their time and energy in today. And the more incremental space will be the things that the middle managers will typically care about. So they'll be innovating a process, innovating perhaps a business model to drive greater revenues, look at innovating the existing product suite to increase its revenue potential